He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're sharing some more encounter stories. But before that, a little show update for you all. Now, this show has been a passion project of mine for a few years now. It's been an amazing journey with Reuben co-hosting and all the things that I have learned. Being less than any sort of professional expert on any of these things has been nothing short of amazing. And I love being able to share, albeit an unbiased position filled with information for all of you to form your own informed decisions and learn a thing or two about something that has or has not impacted or affected your life, whether or not it's been something you've encountered, experienced, or you're just curious and want to learn more. These things, they can leave impressions and stick with some people for their whole lives, while others might pass them by and they think of it in retrospect when conversation pops up. The point I'm trying to make is that this has been a heckin' wonderful journey, and sadly, I must say that I'm putting it on pause once we get through the summer. Now, my goal on this is to get 200 main episodes. And what are we at? Like 185, 84? I'll have to look. But I will see how the summer goes. I spoke to Reuben on this, and we mutually agreed to put it on pause just because life, business, things getting busy. And it takes a lot to do the research and just to look into all these things, and I love doing it, but there's other things that I need to be redirecting my time right now. And I offered Reuben, Reuben, do you want to take over and do the show? He said, no, I got a lot going on my plate too. So that being said, take that as a silver lining. The show is not over, but we will be hitting a tentative pause, at least until we hit the new year. And then I will reevaluate and see what my time looks like and how I can kind of reapproach this and get back into the groove. And it may not be weekly. It might be maybe 2 a month, 1 a month, something like that, because I like everything that we've been able to build with this show. And there's a bunch of people that are following and engaging with us, and it's really turned into something awesome. And so I don't want to completely shut that door for you guys. I want to keep providing some content. So like I said, we're going to see how this summer goes, try to hit that 200 episode mark, and then reevaluate once we hit that new year. So this is your first official announcement on that. I will sprinkle reminders here and there over the next few weekly releases so that any newcomers can be properly informed and they don't just listen to what could be like our last episode of the year, like, oh, this guy's ghosting us all of a sudden. What the heck? On another positive note with that, to all of you newcomers, there is a massive archive that we've built on our YouTube and podcast player platforms that covers an extensive range of Sasquatch, Dogman, paranormal, extraterrestrial, and many other cryptids. So go take a look at that, because I'm sure that there are more than a few things that will catch your interest, if not now, during our break period for sure. It's definitely a plethora of content, and if you haven't tapped into it, well, it's a rabbit hole. There's lots and lots of coverage there. I mean, yeah, it goes on and on, but I digress. With all of that over and done with, let's get into our first encounter. And I quote, "I'll start by saying that this isn't my thing. I've lived the past 27 years not giving a shit about Bigfoot sightings, publications about it, TV shows on the matter, none of it. It's an event that left me with no trauma, mental anguish, or anything. It's simply an experience that I've had. I've shared with friends and various people within my circle who find it hysterical and outlandish, but surprisingly, no one has ever really blown off my story. It's actually been quite a validating experience." And here it goes. I was a typical 10-year-old fifth grader in 1998 who never been on a plane or had ever experienced the United States outside of my home state of Pennsylvania, or the East Coast. My older cousin and his fiancée were residents of Bellingham, Washington, and my mom and grandparents were gracious enough to have me tag along to attend his wedding. The ceremony took place north of Bellingham, Washington, at a golf course. It's now named Shixkin Golf Club, but I'm not certain that this was the name of the location in 1998. I've recently spent some time on Google Maps checking out the layout and can confirm with 100% certainty that everything visible from satellite matches up with my memory. The reception had kicked off at dusk, and as only a bored 10-year-old would do, I ventured outside to throw some golf balls around on a practice green. This area was located next to a fairly large parking lot in front of the main venue. I have no recollection of anyone else being outside with me, as the outside entertainment area was located on the north side of the building, facing opposite from where I was. So there I was, rolling 3 golf balls back and forth, trying to make them into a hole, when something caught the corner of my eye. Bigfoot, 50-75 yards away from me, walking through a clearing between 2 areas of thick tree line. I was never scared, just captivated. The body was massive, I'd say 7 to 8 feet tall. No distinguishable features other than hair, and a very specific walk. I distinctly remember wiping my eyes like, wait, what? And 5 seconds later, it was gone. At this time, I made absolutely no correlation to Bigfoot, rather that I just saw some weird shit. And after I caught my bearings, I went back inside to my grandmother and told her what I saw. She was a wonderful woman, but she dismissed my experience as, oh, this young buck wants attention because he's bored at my older grandson's wedding. And then that was it. Never thought about my experience again, until the late 2000s seemed to bring around the Bigfoot craze on TV. And I was randomly flipping through channels to land on the very moment that they were explaining the stats about the number of sightings in Washington compared to the rest of the country. I would have been between 17 and 19 during this time. I was floored. This was the exact moment when I came to the realization of what I saw. End quote. So, without a doubt, young kids compared to adults seem to have different styles of encounters. Now, of course, with this one, it being a passerby, which is very much in line with most adults' sightings, I would say, I'm going to break this down and go a little bit further. Now, I say this only because, backed by reports that I've looked into and cross-referenced between both children and adults, I'm not saying there has never been an aggressive or negative encounter with kids before. You know, these creatures, it can sometimes be very hit or miss, but there's something with them and the notion of children that is different than Sasquatch and the notion of adults. I remember sharing a report where a group of kids were held up in a cabin that was 8 feet roughly off the ground, and it was lifted up with these poles, these supports, and when the water would periodically flood the underside, so this cabin was designed to be elevated so that you could stay in there and the water wouldn't flood the flooring. It was raised up. And so it was a family cabin that this teenager and his friends were using. But once nighttime came around, they heard these horrific screams outside, and something came at them while they were in their cabin. There was a window or two, and when this thing finally left, they inspected it the next day with adults present and found footprints where the windows were. Now, in retrospect, that means this thing was at least 8 feet tall and looking at them through the window. But the point is, they all felt extremely threatened. If you've seen the 411 missing cases involving children, now, it's not factual evidence of Sasquatch activity being involved, but it's children vanishing without a trace. And then other reports of parents catching their kids in the midst of what could be an abduction by a Sasquatch. Again, take it with a grain of salt, I know, because we aren't there and only have the reports of the witnesses experiencing these situations. Now, the last point I'll make is a story that Reuben has shared many a time before. It always gives me the creeps, but a Sasquatch was caught always looking into the bedroom window of a kid's room on the remote property. The parents panicked and retaliated, and that led to them fleeing the property with the child. Now, this really upset this Sasquatch, supposedly, because when they returned a few days later, the front door was pushed inwards, the house was trashed, all except for the room that belonged to the child, completely untouched. Now, it's impossible to fully understand the motives behind these creatures and their interest in children, but if I had to make any sort of loose guess, I would say children are responsive and open and have extra mental availability than what adults do. And that's not just a concept, but a fact. And because of that, I personally believe it makes them vulnerable to certain things that we may not be cognizant of. That could be paranormal, extraterrestrial. And should Bigfoot be capable of engaging in heightened forms of energy or vibrations, like for some speculate that it can, then perhaps they can sense this amongst children too. Now, while Bigfoot has for centuries prided itself on being the world's #1 hide-and-seek champion of all time, sometimes, well, this is my own perspective. Just sometimes these things want to be seen. And when they are, well, you become a magnet if you're not careful to that type of responding force or energy. That works for both paranormal, extraterrestrial. I feel like once you open that door and they know that you have this state of mental cognition, is maybe that's not the right word, but I feel like, hey, this person's got what we're looking for. Let's follow up on him. Of course, that depends on what you believe and follow. It's a rabbit hole, and I digress. Let's continue. And I quote, "Far out in the wilderness of the Rocky Mountains in Canada, I've seen giant human footprints. And once, while I was scrambling a steep mountain face, the feet were so far apart as if it was walking with ease while I was scrambling on my hands and knees and feet. Another time in a swampy creek area, I've seen footprints that looked like giant human footprints spread far apart going into the creek. Now, my craziest odd experience, one night in the bush at around 2 a.m., I would hear these loud whacks against trees far to the left, and then a loud whack far to the right, miles apart, echoing toward each other. It was so damn loud and insane. One would knock, and then a few seconds later, the other one would knock twice. It was as if they were communicating with each other. And then two different knocking noises got closer and closer to each other and stopped. Then it sounded like trees and bush being ripped apart like a damn elephant was running through the forests. I know the animals in the Rockies, rams headbutt and buck, moose, elk, and such fight with antlers, and they hit their antlers on tree branches, but the whacking noises I heard were as if someone or something were whacking the base of trees with a large stick repeatedly and making it echo. Now, end quote. This is interesting because we're basically focusing on them hearing these tree knocks, and this is something that has been discovered in primates only a few years ago, is them actually taking sticks, smacking roots of trees, and creating sounds that were answered by other groups of their species over long periods of space and distance. And they found that they had certain identifying tree root knocks that they were doing to identify themselves, and certain warning calls and whatnot. So dare I say, it's not out of the question to see this branch over into Sasquatch, even though we haven't confirmed Sasquatch is a reality. I just think it's interesting that we can see evidence of Sasquatch activity, like the things that they do in these encounters, represented in other like apes and so forth. But I can only imagine now, on the focus point of Sasquatch prints, how many have been overlooked in human history. My parents, when I was younger, drilled it into me to watch out for animal poop whenever I was out walking or hiking, and to this day, I'm consistently on the prowl for it in order to avoid stepping in it. It's like heat-seeking eye contact superpowers, which it's weird when I admit that out loud, but the point is, when I'm hiking, I find myself scanning the ground, and lots of times I spot a variety of different animal tracks. While I'm not actively searching for these prints, you can't help but notice them, and I attribute this to my poop scanning abilities. Now bear with me, most people aren't scanning for poop. Most people have their headphones in, their phones out. I'm not trying to shaft everyone, and I understand that there are large demographics that avoid that while they're out enjoying the outdoors, which is great. And perhaps a fair share of those individuals notice prints too, but not everyone does. And I feel like that group of individuals is growing and growing. Dare I say, yeah, they could be out in the woods walking around and they miss Sasquatch print altogether. Now, I myself have not found a print yet. I'm also not hiking in the right areas to possibly find any such print, but the goal of this example is to say we're surrounded by animals and they're leaving all sorts of tracks behind. Now, some blend in and some are blatantly in front of us. We just sometimes don't always notice them, and it's sometimes those ones that we miss that could be, well, very well belonging to a Sasquatch. Now, our next encounter takes us into the fall season, and I quote, "Autumn 2004. I was living in a mobile home with my mom in a slightly rural area. It was either September or October. My mom had gone to work, and I was laying on the unfolded futon in the living room watching a movie. I didn't have to leave until around noon, so I was just chilling. For some reference, our mobile home was a single wide, and the living room was at the end and had lots of windows. Now, next to the living room was the kitchen, and then my mom's room, and then the bathroom, then my room. Behind the mobile home was a fence, maybe 6 to 10 feet from the wall, and then someone's backyard that had a small yappy dog in it. I was laying there mid-late morning alone having some personal time when I heard the dog yapping its head off. Nothing new, so I mostly ignored it. And then I heard grunting really close to my head. I thought maybe the dog had found a partner, if you know what I mean, but it sounded super close to my head. The window behind me was open, and then I heard a voice speaking what sounded like another language. It sounded obscene. It sounded extremely sexual, and I panicked, grabbed my very old school flip phone, and ran to the bathroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a head of dark hair bolt past the kitchen window in the direction that I was running. I tried to call 911 from the bathroom, but the rural area in 2004, I couldn't get a signal. I was able somehow to call a friend, and she called 911 for me. I was told to grab anything to defend myself, because at this point, whoever was outside was running around the entire mobile home, banging on all the walls and doors. It was like they were trying to scare me. I went into the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and then ran back into the bathroom. There was a knock on the door, so I went and yelled out, "Who is it?" To which I heard 2 police officers respond. So I cracked the door open slowly. Sure enough, 2 bored-looking cops. I explained to them what was going on, and they just stood in the driveway, chatting about who knows what. Definitely not what was going on, and at no point did they look around back. Eventually, they left. I called my mom and explained the situation. I was terrified and didn't feel safe walking all the way to the bus stop, which was quite a walk away. She came home to take me to work before I got into the car. Now, I, feeling more curious than scared since my mom was right there, peeked around the back of the mobile home. My jaw dropped. There wasn't anyone there, but for me to have seen the top of the person's head, they had to be at least 8 feet tall, if not taller. Now remember, they were running past the window. You can't do that standing on something. Also, the ground wasn't flat. It was very steep until you got to the fence. End quote. The language chatter is interesting, and I like to play these every once in a while. So I'm gonna play a bit of audio here. Now, I like to play this because I still meet folks who are unaware of the Sierra sounds, and I highly recommend them for any Sasquatch aficionados out there. We also had the pleasure of interviewing Ron Moorhead, where he speaks about the sounds and his other works as of late, but I digress. Though this encounter, it's terrifying, and it has a similar notion towards what we were discussing at the very start of the show. When you're young, these things have a different, increased type of interest. Whatever those reasons are remains to be seen, of course. But like we mentioned on previous shows, and with adults alike, they will smack and bang the walls of a home or car you're in to try and get a response. At least that's what it seems like. I am sure without a doubt they could break in if they wanted, but they don't. I imagine they aren't subject to old school vampire rules where they have to be invited in. We genuinely just don't know. And of course, like the encounter I was talking about what Reuben likes to share, they did break in that instance, but no one was home. And maybe they knew no one was home because they were banging on the walls and they didn't have any reason to think, okay, maybe someone is in there and we won't go in, or maybe someone isn't there. Let's take our chance now and cause a ruckus. Who knows? We just don't know. It remains to be seen. And with that, this episode is concluded. We'll be back next week. I hope you had a great Mother's Day weekend wherever you are, and an equally great week to follow suit. Remember, you can find us on social media and YouTube, and should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via CryptidClues@gmail.com. I'm your host, Taylor. Remember, take care and stay safe.